Hey, folks, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Ryan Kennedy, and today's episode is with an author whose book was recommended to me by a patient called The Best Version Ever. And I enjoyed the shit out of this book. I read it a few weeks back. It's concise. And what I really liked is it's packed full of actionable advice that proved super useful to me, especially as I was reflecting on 2022 and mapping out my goals and vision for the new year. So I brought on the author, Josh Painter, who founded the Best Version Ever community because he realized most people are living a life that others expect of them, not one true to themselves. And unfortunately, he was in the same boat, moving from job to job, barely getting by. At one point, he almost lost everything, which we're going to talk about in today's episode. And since that time, this dude has built and sold a successful real estate company. He started a charity organization, and he really lives out his best life ever and helps others do the same. So, Josh, welcome to the show, man.
Dude, thanks so much, man. It's good to be here and catch up and see how close we live to each other. So
I know, right?
that was
One of
cool.
the things I found super inspiring about your story was overcoming this massive setback in the 08, 09 financial collapse. And so I want you to share as we kick things off your backstory leading up to that point, and then kind of your journey coming out of that for people listening in.
Yeah, so I guess it's hard to start that story without super rewinding back to when I was 17. In high school, found out my girlfriend was pregnant. And so as a young kid, I thought that there were certain things that I was then supposed to do, right? You're supposed to get married, you're supposed to get a full-time job. Doesn't really matter if you're passionate about it, right? You've got to pay the bills, you've got to get bills and collect bills and just keep living this life. And I very much lived a life that I thought I was expected to live. And someone challenged me recently and said, "Well, who expected that from you?" And it's like, well, I guess myself, and I guess I told myself that, right? But a lot of us, I think, have this feeling of, there are certain milestones that you're just supposed to hit. We very rarely give thought to them. So, I did that for a good 10 plus years. And at one point, I even worked in a jail for 5 years and felt like I was in jail. But at 30 years old, I reached a turning point where I just remember it was my birthday, my 30th birthday. And I was deep in the middle of, what I call the trifecta of bad credit. I had filed bankruptcy, lost a house, and little did I know that later on divorce was going to be on the horizon, all within a 6 month period. But at 30 years old, I remember thinking, okay, if I don't do something different, before you know it, I'll wake up and another 10 years will have gone by and I'll be 40 and I'll still be living this life of expectations, right? And on
Mhm.
autopilot. So yeah, at 30 years old, I decided to burn the boats and, leave that relationship, and just set off on a new course. There's so much to unpack, right? Because I would say I worked in the jail for 5 years, and I must have been around 26 or 27 when I decided I couldn't do that anymore and I needed to leave. So I decided to get into real estate right around 2005, as a loan officer. I made it a good 3 years, but the market collapsed, and I just didn't have enough experience or clientele to kind of weather through that. So got a job again, and so that brings me to, again, now I'm 30 years old. It's about 2008. I'm working a job, I'm still trying to make loans work. And I just remember thinking, like, I got to go all in on this. So I walked into my boss's office and just said, "Hey, how do I quit?" And I could tell that, like, no one had ever asked that before because it was a government job.
Mhm.
And they're like, put it in writing. And I said, "Okay, would an email work?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "All right, cool." And I went to my desk, typed an email and said, "I'm resigning," and just drove home. So I'm doing loans, and I mean, man, I'm struggling at this point. I've got a $600 a month apartment, 2 bedroom, so each kid can have their own room. And I sold a Honda Civic just to be able to get cash to rent an apartment. And the foreclosure wave is happening and banks are just taking forever to sign paperwork and get homes sold. And I remember I worked on one loan for months, and it was a small loan, 75 grand. So at the end of the deal, I call the real estate agent to congratulate her, and I'll never forget because I made about $400 on this loan. She says, "Okay," and she doesn't sound excited, and I was like, "Aren't you excited? Like we finally closed this one?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, it wasn't really a big deal for me. I think I only made $4,000 on this one." So that, I mean, that day I was like, I'm on the wrong side of this. So I already had a real estate license because I did loans, and I drove to the real estate office nearby that she worked at because that's what I had in my mind. And I said, "Where do I sign up?" And then the next day, I bought 12 generic open house signs. And I put them up at a foreclosure, and about 40 people came in. And I wrote an offer on that house. Now, the offer did not get accepted, but I realized, I was like, wait a minute, if I just do this every single day, there's no way I'm not going to sell a house this month. And that ended up, proving true. I mean, it took me a good 3 months before the first one closed. But from that point, it just snowballed. So, yeah,
Yeah, that's
that was a super long answer about a turning point. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot to unpack.
no, I mean, dude, that's what I was really inspired by because you mean being a young father, going through this massive, financial, bankruptcy and then the divorce and just everything just coming together against you all at the same time. And then what impressed me reading about this story in your book was that, a lot of people lost everything during this time, but only a small percentage of them overcame that setback and actually thrived on the other side of it. And I'm curious to hear, what do you think sets people apart who are going through tough times rather than throwing in the cards and saying like, man, I'm fucked, this sucks, opposed to saying like, this is an opportunity. I'm going to really take this and do everything I can to come out the other side better and, than I started.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's important to remember that we're all fucked at various times in our lives, right? I mean, and nothing that I don't think anything I faced was unique to me. So I think the difference is just realizing, yeah, I mean, it's a mindset shift for sure, but just
Mm-hmm.
realizing like nothing lasts forever. I got asked this question this morning, like, how do you move on when you're facing adversities? It's like, well, I just remind myself that things that bothered me a few years ago, I'm not even thinking about them anymore. And whatever's bothering me right now, today, I'm not going to remember this 2 years from now, right? So I try to fast forward into that mindset of like, if life is 10% what happens and 90% how I react, and those are just numbers I pulled out of my ass, but I just always think of like, okay, this already happened. Anything that happens after this happened is just all my reaction to it. So the faster I can get over that and move on and figure out a way, I mean, yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel it's so funny because like I lost my house in '07, and relatively speaking, that was early, compared to other people, right? Some people lost their homes in '08, '09, '10.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm so grateful that I was one of the first ones because that made it easier for me to bounce back faster. You know what I mean? I know people that held on and held and held on and held on and scraped for years and then ended up, losing it anyway. So feel very fortunate that I just got it over with fast, and was able to bounce, like you said, bounce back. I just almost immediately, I just started thinking like, okay, when can I buy a house again? You know, two
Yeah.
years, two
No, that's
years.
awesome. That
Yeah.
didn't like scar you from real estate. Because a lot of people, I think, where that happens, I could see it, happening where you just don't want anything to do with real estate after that, after going through that type of issue. And um,
Yeah.
you know, it's definitely an interesting shift of frame where your mindset was. And I think that's a good
Yeah.
way to look at it. It's just like in the future, is this really going to be that big a deal? And
Yeah.
time definitely does soften the blow.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I knew, okay, I got burned, but let's jump back in when I can, right? And
Yeah.
I remember thinking like, okay, in 2 years I can buy a house. Matter of fact, after a year and a half, I bought a house. Just started throwing in applications, and one lender approved me out
Nice.
of out of probably 10. So
Wow. And
Yeah.
so as you got started with the real estate, you're starting from scratch. How long did it take you to build momentum in that and actually get some good, deal flow coming in and get some good leads and actually start to make an income to where you could crawl out of the deficit?
So I started generating leads almost immediately because if you do, and literally if you spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, there's no way you're not going to generate leads. So I started working with people almost right away, but I didn't have my first closing for 3 months. But once I got the first closing, and then the next one, probably also that month, and then the next one the next month, it's never not been a thing since 2008, right? I've never, yeah. It took me 3 months to get momentum. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's
To
quick,
answer
man.
your question. Yeah.
Yeah, especially in a time when, the market was not on fire. It wasn't like people were jumping for joy to buy homes necessarily. And were you working with mainly investors at the time or just residential home buyers?
So we're talking about initially 2008. So there was a lull from '07 to '08, and that was the period where I had the government job, on the side.
Hmm.
In early '08, I quickly realized that a few things were happening. Banks were unloading houses onto the market, and there was nobody there to market them or sell them. Meaning, like, if you're a listing agent and you get a bank owned listing, they were doing the bare minimum, man. They weren't marketing them at all. They were just taking some photos with an old ass camera and posting it online. So that was happening. And then at the same time, all these buyers were coming out now because homes were 50% off, relatively speaking, give or take.
Yeah.
So those two things combined, what I was doing was I was taking all of the bank owned listings in my office and I was posting them on Craigslist as if they were my own because I had permission and the listing agents didn't care. So I would post these listings on Craigslist and then buyers would call me and go, "Hey, I'd like to see this home." I'd be like, "Cool, let's meet there." And I'd make friends with them. And so I was just finding all these buyers that again couldn't afford a home 2 years before that, and now they were half price. And so yeah, I mean, I made a business out of that. The following year, I started working with investors, and that's its own story in the book. If you want, we can go into that.
Yeah, yeah. Let's dive into that as it kind of accumulates to where you
Yeah,
ultimately sold your real estate business. So I want to kind of, paint a
yeah, yeah,
picture
yeah.
here.
Yeah. So about a year after that. Oh, and by the way, I had didn't even tell that story, but I had ended up borrowing like 12 grand from my parents, 10 grand to keep the house that I ended up losing. And then another 2,000 when I was down to like my last $60. So September, I closed my first few deals. Fast forward to May the following year of '09, I give them a check for 12 grand. I'm good. Don't even miss the money. Things are good. And then it must have been, I think it was June or July, like 2 months after that, I get a text from the manager in the office and he says, "Do you want to work with some investors in San Diego?" I could have asked a million questions, but this is just one of those opportunities where I tell people, like, just say yes. Just figure everything out later, right? Say
Hmm.
yes. So I just texted him back and I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, cool. Well, they're going to be in the office this week, Thursday. Meet them." And I was like thinking like, "Oh shit, he's not going to be here." Okay. So they tell me, "Hey, we're looking to buy and flip homes. We'd love it if we could just do one or two a month. If we could do 12, maybe 24 in a year, that's our ultimate goal." I said, "Okay." So I walked them through like everything that we would do for them and how they were going to accomplish this. And I pretty much didn't know what I was talking about, to be quite honest. I mean, I had ideas, but at the end of that meeting, they said, "Okay, send us a proposal." And I was like, "A proposal?" I'm thinking like, what are they talking about? So I go home, I Google proposal template, I download a Word doc, and I fill this whole thing out, just proposing everything that we're gonna do. They asked me to meet them at the house the next day with the contractor I always work with. So I'm calling around. I'm like, "I need a contractor. I need a contractor." This guy Greg's name comes up. I call Greg. I'm like, "I don't know you. Meet me at this house tomorrow. Just get there early. Let's just become real quick friends." So we meet there. We bro out. The investors come, we walk them through this house. They're like, all right, at the end, they go, we'll let you know. So I'm getting in my car, phone rings. They go, hey, we bought a house yesterday. Send us a listing agreement for it. All right, cool. That turned into a 4-year relationship where I helped them buy and sell over about 400 homes.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, at the height, keep in mind their goal was to do 12 to 24 a year.
Yeah.
At the height, we were holding 60.
Jeez.
Like at any given time, we'd have like 20 on the market, 20 in escrow, and 20 being rehabbed, right? I mean, at the height, I remember counting at least 60 homes that they were holding on to. They ended up getting like a $12 million credit line. I had 8 full-time drivers. All they would do is drive every night. They would drive the properties the night before they would go to the auction and just give me all the notes on them, see if they were occupied. We had all these just things that we had learned throughout the process of, like, if you can't tell if the home's occupied, turn on the water on the hose. If no water comes out, the water's turned off, right? I mean, just trying to figure out who lives here, what the situation was. We'd always try to find an open window so we could get inside and just check out how the house is. I had 3 full-time assistants. One of them, her job was just to drive around, put on, take off lock boxes, and then take notes on properties. And then we had 1 or 2 people that would go to the auction and bid for these guys. So I got on the job training on how to flip homes, right? Because I got to walk them through enough of these that I quickly learned, oh, okay, this is what flipping homes looks like. And they got on the job training too, because they didn't really know what they were doing. But yeah, it turned that into, I think, 360 homes. But then another guy heard what I was doing for them and he approached me, and I ended up helping him buy and sell 60 homes. So altogether, over 400. I would say after, I'm trying to like segue back to your original question. So after about a year of doing that, I remember like running on the treadmill and listening to Tony Robbins and just getting all super motivated one day and thinking I should get my broker's license. Um, so that day I went home, and this story's like not even in the book, but that day I just go home and just sign up to do the schooling and the test for the broker's license. So I passed that test, start my own brokerage because I want to, stop paying the brokerage fees. And then after I've got my broker's license, I think like, oh, I should invite a couple friends. Maybe they'll work with me. And they do. And that just snowballed, man. It was like became this word of mouth thing, or I'd work with an agent and we'd do a deal together, build rapport. I'd invite them. And I mean, before you know it, I had 50 agents in my brokerage. So,
Wow.
yeah. Yeah.
And during this time, when you're working with the flippers, you're selling all these homes, are you actively investing yourself? Are you seeing what these guys are doing and like, hey, maybe I should flip some homes? I can see what's going on here, or even buy and hold and,
Yeah.
build a rental
Yeah.
portfolio?
Yeah. So like I said, I got on the job training. So what happened was I saved up enough commissions so that I had 40 grand, and I had 2 other friends in real estate, and they were almost a similar situation. So the 3 of us each put in 40 grand. We bought a house, and I'm just loosely speaking, we bought a house for $120,000 at the auction, and we sold it for 150. Now we each had 50 grand. So we each put in 50 and bought a house for 150, sold it for whatever, 180, 190, right? Now we each
Mhm.
have 60 grand, and so on. And it just snowballed from there, right? Like we just kept doing it a lot. So yeah, that was, I had a good run of flipping business from roughly 2011 to 2014. I mean, I've still done them over the years, right? Like I did a couple in the last couple years. It's just SoCal's a little more difficult, and I'd been more brokerage focused lately. So
Mhm. And then at what point did you decide to sell the brokerage?
that's funny. God, it all ties back to like what we were talking about. I was in a mastermind, and we decided to go paddleboarding, and there was a new guy, and he didn't know how to paddleboard, so he's just kind of moving around on his knees, not getting up. And so I'm a nice guy. I was like, I'm gonna hang out with this guy. I feel bad for him. He doesn't. Everyone else is taking off.
Mhm.
And so I asked him like, "Hey man, why do you work?" Because he worked with a competing brokerage. "Why do you work there?" And he goes, "Oh, they bought my business." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And I just had never heard of that in the real estate space. I know it exists, but I just had never even thought about it. So I was like, "Hey man, make an intro for me." So I ended up talking to them for like 3 or 4 months. Nothing came of it. But one of them that I was talking to a few months later ended up buying a franchise and coming back to me and saying, "Hey, let's do that deal." And I said, "Okay." So we talk for a few months, and then the world shuts down, and it's COVID hits in March, right? And so they're like, "Hey, we're not buying any businesses right now." I'm like, "Okay,
Mhm.
I get it." And then fast forward to like May-ish, real estate's still selling, nothing's changed. And so we go, "Hey, let's do the deal." And so I sold my brokerage in June of 2020 during the
Okay.
pandemic. Yeah.
Nice. And then since then, you've just been all in on best version ever. What's your active business at the moment? What kind of stuff you getting into?
Great question. So, something that just based on timing was not able to make it into the book. The company that bought my brokerage actually ran itself into the ground 3 months ago.
Oh no.
And now that this has happened, I'm hearing that it's like a pretty common story. I just didn't know this was a thing, but evidently, like, so I was talking to one of my friends. He's like, "Yeah, my dad has sold automotive repair places so many times, and then he just gets them back because the place runs it into the ground." And he's like, "My dad's done this over and over and over again." So, yeah, man, they ran everything. They just ran out of money, and since they couldn't finish paying us, they said, "Here's your company's back," which is crazy because the companies are profitable. Like, it's a real estate brokerage. It's not some crazy thing. It's
Yeah.
so so you're one of the first ones to hear this, but I'm actually bringing back 3 separate brokerages right now as we speak in Southern California,
Exciting. I like it.
but still doing the best version of everything, of course.
Yeah.
But it's just crazy because when I started last year, so I mean, so I was involved with the company that bought me out. I was in a leadership role there. But the plan was, okay. I do these goal setting events. I'm gonna write the book. I'm gonna turn this into this, and then 3 months ago, life laughed at me and was like, "No, got different plans." So
Well, I want to transition to the goal setting side of things because you do have a really cool method for identifying and really narrowing down goals that I found super valuable in the book. And as we, roll into the new year, I think it'd be great to dissect the details for people listening in. So outline kind of your strategy of what you teach people in your community for goal setting.
yeah, I mean, so it starts with questions, right? Introspection, journaling, which you can find all the questions in the book. Obviously, we're not going to read them, but there's this idea that questions are like a lens to the world. And as soon as you're asked a question, or as soon as you ask yourself a question, it totally changes the way that you see things. And so, what I've done is studied questions that bring out the best in people, allow people to see their future self. Um, because I'm just not a big fan of just sitting down and going, "Okay, what are my goals?" Right? It's totally uninspiring. So I mean, I guess long story short, I've spent a lot of time crafting good questions to kind of help those answers reveal themselves.
Hmm.
And then from there we even go into just like a total brain dump of write down everything that comes to mind, no matter how ridiculous it is. And I've got tons of prompts for people that just maybe are having a hard time thinking of things. So, and then once you do a brain dump, then you can kind of narrow it down, asking yourself different questions like, is this relevant to me? Is this my goal, or is this someone else's goal? Right.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, no, that's the perfect way to start because then you got a vision of really what you want, and then you
yeah.
can reverse engineer it from there
Yeah.
into scheduling things out to gain
Hmm.
that momentum. Because one of the things I teach the patients I work with is having these overarching kind of macro goals. It's all fine and good, but they don't really help you,
Yeah.
especially the way most people do goal setting. It's like, hey, I want to make this much money and I want to achieve this in my health and fitness and I want to do this with my relationships or travel. It's like, all right, awesome. Like those are
Hmm.
great to have
Hmm.
kind of as your North Star, so to say.
Hmm.
But if you don't dissect that and actually break down, like, all right, in order to get there,
Yeah.
this is what I need to do I need to make this much per month or this much per week in my business. And in order to get there, I need to generate this number of leads. And
Yeah.
in order to get those leads, I need to make this number of calls or send out this number of emails or whatever
Yeah.
kind of systems you have in place for your specific business. And that's where most people miss that step of like the
Hmm.
daily actions, the daily steps and habits that are actually going to work you towards those goals.
Hmm.
And so I'm a big fan of just more so focusing on day to day. What can you
Hmm.
do today? What can you
Yeah.
do tomorrow? What can you do next week to incrementally work you towards these bigger overarching objectives?
Yeah. And that's one thing that we actually do in the game plan chapter, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, if you were on track to finish this or hit this milestone in a year, what would that look like? What are the things that I need to do every single month? What are the things that I need to do every single week, daily? And then the best is like, what can I do right this second to move me towards that goal? Shut the book. Don't come back until you've done that. That started from something I did in my live events, right? We would do the goals and then I would just kick everyone out of the room and say, go take the first action. Don't come back until you have. And so what it forces people to do is like, people, oh man, I want to lose weight. Cool, go join a gym. Like, don't come back in this room until you have a gym membership, or if you're trying to like track your food or eat better, right? Like, go download this app that tracks. You're gonna start tracking your food today, right? I mean, those are just simple examples. I had one girl come back and she's like, I called my boss and told him I'm going to work part-time starting today because I want to follow my dream. And I'm like, okay, that's what we're talking about. So
Yeah.
yeah, we've had lots of little micro actions that make it's taking that first step, right? Like I think statistically, like I'm not going to say the wrong numbers, but just taking that first step is so huge, and
Mm-hmm.
often the hardest part.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. It's building that momentum that starts to create that compound effect.
Hmm.
That's the most powerful tool for sustaining progress and really continuing with the habits, even if it seems daunting at first. You just got to
Yes.
get going. And as you build momentum, it starts to become easier. And then you're seeing results and getting progress. And then it all starts to add up on itself, which is always the key to really advancing more quickly.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about as you've kind of gone through this journey from kind of starting from scratch, building this awesome real estate brokerage, and also this community is what teacher or teaching has had the greatest impact on your life? If you could identify a mentor or a book or anything that was a learning from that you learned from that really excels you on your journey.
Mm. Oh man, there's so many. One of the reasons I wrote the book is so I would stop having to recommend so many books, right? It's like, here, just read this. It has everything I've ever learned.
Yeah.
Um, Damn. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Darren Hardy's The Compound Effect. I'm a big fan of the book Living a Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Um, every part of me wants to look at my bookshelf right now, but I'm not going to do it. I just like I'm going to go with Tony Robbins or Darren Hardy.
I like it. I
Yeah.
like it. Well, as we wrap things up here, man, I do have a question tying things back to real estate, just because you've
Mhm.
been in the game for so long. What are your predictions on the market moving forward? You hear all these people who are, the sky is falling. This is going to be the worst crash in our lives. And then you have other people like, oh, it's going to stabilize out and it's going to be pretty mild on real estate. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. And no, don't have
No,
to,
no,
I
no.
understand you don't have a crystal ball, but just your
Totally.
opinion.
Yep. So the very first thing I'm going to say is I'm often wrong. No, I just stopped predicting things because I remember in 2014 it kind of felt slow and we were all like, "Ooh, is this the top of the market again?"
uh,
So I've stopped like trying to. Okay. So when COVID first started, everyone's like, "That's it. That was the best run we've ever had. The market's going down." Right?
yeah.
Everybody was wrong.
Yep.
Um, Matter of fact, I was selling a house at that time and buying, and I asked 40 of like just my highest regarded friends who are all multimillionaires. I asked all of them for their advice. What would you do? 38 of them said sell the house and go rent. And if I had done that, I would have missed out on 25% appreciation. Yep. Sorry, this is a long-winded answer.
No, this is really good context.
Really saying I don't freaking know. But if I have to like think what do I think will probably happen? Probably just stay about the same for a while, you know? I mean, yes, home sales are down, but they're still down to about the level they were in like 2018 or 19. So it feels like it's super slow right now because we're used to 20 and 21. You know, a big wild card is going to be interest rates, but it kind of feels like they've kind of started leveling off. So I don't know, man. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like
a fair answer.
Feels like it's pretty chill here in SoCal. You know, there's been a little bit of softening here and there, but you could debate whether it's softening or whether sellers were just trying to ask for unreasonable pricing, you know, based on the beginning of last year. So yeah. So I mean, final answer. Feels like it's just kind of plateaued a little bit, and that's what I'm not foreseeing any crazy increases or any crazy decreases. It just feels like a plateau and maybe some softening here and there.
Yeah. No, I feel the same way. Well, thank you for your time today, Josh. I'm glad we connected because we live right next to each other. We're going to have to get out and play some pickleball soon.
Sounds good. Who knew?
Where can people go to learn more about your work? Definitely recommend anyone listening in go to Amazon or any book retailer for picking up a copy of your recent book, Best Version Ever. But if people want to follow along on social, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, just go to bestversionever.com. You can get to anywhere from there. And then on social, it's usually Josh Painter or Joshua Painter. So yeah.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you found it helpful, please share it along to anyone else you believe it can serve. You can submit your own question to be answered on the show by going to ryankennedyhealth.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review for the show. Your feedback helps to support me on my mission to positively impact as many people as possible with this information. Please note, the information depicted in this episode is purely for informational purposes only. Please consult your healthcare professional before making any changes to your lifestyle or routine.